Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I'm your host, Richard Costello, and today I'm pleased to introduce Andrew Tong. Andrew is the Senior Vice President of Investments at Concert Properties and is responsible for leading the planning and performance of Concert's real estate income portfolio across Canada. Andrew oversees all acquisitions, dispositions, asset and portfolio investment management, term financing, commercial leasing, as well as Concert's residential condominium and seniors land acquisitions across Canada. Andrew is also Managing Director of Concert's CREC Commercial Fund LP, which he played a key role in creating in 2016. This open-ended fund includes over 70 office and industrial properties valued at $1.8 billion. Andrew is actively involved with NAOP, RealPAC, and the Urban Development Institute. He has served with several non-profit organizations, both locally and nationally, and has mentored countless real estate and finance students in his role as adjunct professor at UBC Sauder School of Business. Andrew, a big welcome to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, I want to begin by acknowledging and belatedly congratulating you on the milestone you achieved last year, which was your 25th anniversary with Concert. Service of this kind is almost unheard of in this day and age. So I understand you joined Concert straight out of university, and the company has clearly become a big part of your life ever since. It'll be great to hear how your role has progressed over the years, but perhaps before we get to that, could you give us a glimpse of what life was like for you growing up? Perhaps tell us who were your early role models and how they influenced you.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. So, my parents were really the biggest influence. They were immigrant parents. They worked extremely hard, and they really wanted to provide for their family. Family was really the most important thing in their view. But my father, I was really close to my father. He's now passed away. He had a battle with cancer, but just like most immigrants, he was by himself when he came to Canada. He had very little when he came to Canada. He had no support network. He had multiple jobs. He was working at a Chinese restaurant in Winnipeg, and he did a deal with the doorman at the movie theater and said, "Look, I'll give you a bowl of soup every day if you will let me watch the same movie over and over again." The doorman said, "Well, why would we want to watch the same movie?" And he wanted to learn English, and so that's how he learned English. He watched the same Western movie over and over again. And so my father was really big on hard work and an honest job.
Did they meet in Winnipeg?
They met in Winnipeg, and then they eventually, through my father's jobs, he was able to get a place in Victoria, a job in Victoria, and then eventually in Vancouver.
Right. So did you grow up in Vancouver yourself?
I did, yeah. I grew up in Vancouver, born and raised in Vancouver.
That's a great story. So you graduated UBC with a Bachelor of Commerce, and I've read that you had a very targeted approach to pursuing an employer at this time. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so what happened was, so imagine in 1994, the brand new David Lamb Library, which is not new anymore, but at the time it was new. I remember seeing many buddies at the photocopying room, and I'd be looking at what they're doing, and I noticed that they had these resumes and these cover letters that said, "To whom it may concern." And there was like a friend of mine who had 300 resumes that he was sending out. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm trying to get a job." I said, "I don't know if this is the right way to get a job." So instead, what I did was I thought maybe I should do some homework on the real estate industry, because at the time, 26 years ago, the Sauder School, the urban land program, the real estate program, it didn't focus a lot on what's actually happening in the world, but it focused a lot on academic analysis for real estate. So I had to do some homework on the real estate industry in Canada, but there was no intranet. And so I went to the Vancouver Public Library Central Branch. I went to the periodicals, and looked at all these newspaper clippings on real estate in Canada. And what I was trying to do is understand more about the industry, but also understand about, okay, what type of firm would want to work for. And I basically came out with three types of categories. And so the first category was I was looking for people who had dreams and they were like dreamers. But the second is that they were well funded. Because if you're not well funded in real estate, which is capital intensive, then you're just a dreamer, and you won't actually execute. And the third is that they had really highest integrity and character. And so out of the whole homework I'd done, came up with 7 firms. They were big, they were small, they were Toronto, they were Vancouver. And so, of course, in 1994, there was no jobs available. The market wasn't that awesome, but I was able to meet a decision maker in each of those firms, and I did anything I could to meet whoever the decision maker was. I did meet with each decision maker, and then I was fortunate. I got a job opportunity from each of the 7 that I approached. But then I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. What do I do? And I remember speaking to Giorgio Ikawa, who was a mentor of mine. He was one of the top appraisers in British Columbia. He's now passed away, but he was considered one of the most well-respected and gentleman diplomat in the industry, certainly a legend. And I told him my circumstance. I had the fortune of working with him in my third year of university as an intern. And he said to me, as I went through the list, he said, no, you got to go with Concert. At the time, it was called VLC Properties. He said, no, VLC. And I said, well, let me tell you more about the others. He said, no, there's nothing to talk about. And I said, why? And he said, because you will not get better people than Jack Poole and Dave Podmore. So he said, you will not regret it. And so that's exactly how I was fortunate to land at Concert.
Yeah, that's a great story as well. So your personal career journey has almost evolved in lockstep with the growth of Concert over the years. So can you provide our listeners with a brief overview of how your role has changed since you started as a sales and marketing coordinator all those years ago?
Yeah, so when 26 years ago we started our condominium business, and so I was the second employee in our department. The head of the sales and marketing division started 6 months before me, and we started working on condominium projects. And then as the needs of the company grew, I worked on development projects on the commercial side as we started to grow our commercial side of the business. Then they needed more help on the acquisition side. So then I started helping with the acquisitions of our commercial land, and then eventually our existing income properties. And then eventually I was involved with acquisitions for our residential condominium land, our rental land, our seniors land. And then we bridged beyond Vancouver and went to Toronto, and then eventually went to Calgary, and then we went to Edmonton, and then we went to Victoria. And so now, after all this time, now I lead the investments group, which does all the items that you mentioned previously.
And how have you invested in yourself? Like, what are the main reasons that you've been able to continue to take on greater roles and responsibilities?
Well, I think it's a couple things. It's number one is I think that I love to learn, and I love to know how things work. I feel like everybody's got a story. Every tenant's got a story. Your staff have got a story. Each task is important, and it contributes to the end product. The second thing is that 26 years ago, I remember when we started. We used to have a phrase called "whatever it takes," and it means that one day I'd be like pricing the condominium units individually in a condominium tower, and doing statistical analysis of who would be the target market and so on and so forth. And the next day I'd be mowing the lawn in front of the presentation center, to make sure that it was ready for opening on the Saturday. And so the idea was, you know, you've got to do whatever it takes to get the job done and be passionate about it. I would say that's what I did, but what Concert did was Concert took a risk on me, and for every role that I've been fortunate to have. And also, I was at the right place at the right time in a growing company. So they needed somebody to execute They wanted somebody dependable that they could rely on, and so they trusted me with that task.
Turning to the subject of leadership, so making the transition to becoming a manager, it's not an easy thing to do especially when you've grown up within a company. So what lessons did you learn through this process that would be helpful for anyone else looking at making that step in their career?
I would say the biggest thing is that in being a manager is that you need to look at your staff and your team not as on a transactional basis. So you have to look at the relationship, and you have to build trust. And the team members need to know that you care for them both personally and professionally, and that you're authentic, that you're what you say you do, and what you say is truthful. Another sort of lesson is that just like parenting and coaching is you don't treat one with more favor than another. You got to see where each individual's their potential, and but you got to meet them kind of where they're at, and don't try to assume that they can be equal to everybody else. And probably the final thing is that as a manager, you have to be super passionate to unlock, your team members' talents and gifts, and try to push them a little bit, even when they don't necessarily want to be pushed, but a little bit pushing to try to push them beyond what they think they could do themselves. And that's certainly what I've learned the most in being a manager of people.
So I have to say, in preparing for this recording, I really struggled to narrow down the topics for us to cover off because, as I mentioned in your introduction, the scope of your role is quite something. But one of the topics I'd like for us to discuss is one that I think can be tricky to understand, especially for an arts major like myself, which is real estate financing. So it's such an integral part of the business for real estate developers and investors, and there's so many career paths and opportunities to be had in this space. You wrote a great piece for REI BC, which I'll provide a link to in the show notes, but I was hoping we could go over this as you explained it in such a useful way. So this might be an obvious question, but in what circumstances do real estate developers need to secure financing?
So there's essentially four types of mortgages. There's a construction mortgage, so that could be to build a building, to do servicing or infrastructure work on the land. The second is a term mortgage, or also called a takeout mortgage. The third is a joint construction and term mortgage, where you combine them both and not have two separate ones. And the fourth is a land acquisition mortgage, so it's just buying the land on its own. Those are the type of mortgages that exist.
Okay, what's a term mortgage?
So a term mortgage would be like you would get in a house mortgage, where you are there, the building exists already, and all of a sudden your house would be a 2-year mortgage or a 5-year
I see.
mortgage. Similar on an income property, there you might do a 2-year, 5-year. In our case, we go longer because of our profile as institutional investors and pension funds.
Okay. And in general, then, what types of companies are offering these services and how do they differ from one another?
So there's so many different types of lenders out there. There's pension funds, insurance companies, there's chartered banks, credit unions, there's institutional and private syndicates, they're private equity firms, and they differ based on the view of risk, their view of return, their view of time. So in the case of like a pension fund, their horizon would be very long, and so because their liabilities are longer. But they want to earn like a good return, but they don't have, but they're there for the long haul. So they'd be willing to do like a 5, 10, 15, 20-year term mortgage. And they would be very, very good, for example, for an income property, very competitive. But a chartered bank or a credit union would have a shorter horizon. So they would be, 1 to 5 years, for example. They would want a floating rate. And so for example, they're extremely competitive on, let's say, construction financing. A private firm may be very short term, or they're prepared to take a bit more risk. And so maybe they're prepared to do like a mezz debt, which is really a second mortgage on your property. And so take a little bit more risk. They're prepared to do like 0 to 3 years, in terms of a term, but they'll get a little bit of a better interest rate, as in it will be a higher interest rate because they're taking a little bit more risk to it.
Right. Okay. I see. So could you walk us through what your process is like when you're looking to finance a project?
So We look at the lender just like a financial partner. And so what's really important is that they understand us and they understand the project. And so when it comes to us, they need to know kind of our vision, are the key people that they be dealing with, what is our plans, what is our financial circumstances, the organization, our financial position. And then for the project, they need to understand the vision of the project. They need to understand the timeline. They need to understand the risks related to the project that we see. We share with them our financial projections and our due diligence results. And we're very transparent with all that, because if you're a partner, financial partner, there should be no hidden secrets. And so we are trying to be as transparent as possible when it comes to our financing partners.
So, Andrew, what does the team look like that you're putting together to put this package forward?
Well, in addition to the concert team, where we have a whole bunch of different people within our the concert entity and different departments involved, we also hire third-party consultants that are involved with the project. So, for example, we have an environmental consultant or building condition consultant, and in that you have a structural engineer, an electrical engineer, and it goes down the list. We also sometimes you might hire a mortgage broker to be involved with the actual transaction. Let's say if there's a capacity issue or you want some expert advice. And so we use a variety of different consultants to make sure that we've provided the best, most transparent reports possible. Another example would be appraisals, where we work closely with our appraisers to make sure that we provide the best market value. So it's not just our view, but there's a third-party independent review.
Right. Okay. And so do you have a lender in mind, or do you typically go out to a range of different possible options?
We have done both. Part of it is if you're in the market and you're knowledgeable what's happening, you'll already know the needs and wants of each of the lenders.
Mm.
And sometimes we would be targeted. Often, though, we would bring it out to the market, because you just never know where there are changing needs of each lender, and their different requirements change, where they may want something today that they didn't want previously.
Right.
And so what we have found is by talking to our lenders across Canada, we have I call it Rolodex, but no one understands what Rolodex is today. But we have a list of key lenders that we do business across Canada with. They're tier one lenders, and we're fortunate we have an excellent relationship with all of them. And so with that, we talk with them regularly about what they're seeking, and what's important to them to meet their allocation requirements.
Right.
And so that we try to match the right fit for the real estate that we actually have.
Okay. So what advice do you have for other groups who are looking to have a successful lending experience?
I think the biggest thing is I often say to our lenders is, it's your money, and we want to be a good steward of your money. So we never want to feel entitled that somehow it's our money. It's not. They're lending it to us. They're trusting that we're going to be wise about how we're spending it, and provide them the right return that they are looking for. The second is probably we don't want any surprises. We don't want to give them any surprises. Always want to be upfront with them. And part of the trick here is we always want to anticipate what their needs are, so that before they even ask a question, we already know what they're going to ask. At the end of the day, what we want to do is just provide good respect and value to them, and want them to always know that they can trust us.
Are you looking for a trusted recruiter who lives and breathes Canadian real estate? At Highview, we bring over 20 years of recruiting experience to help steer you in the right direction. We are passionate about your success in this industry, so we will arm you with important information and give you the tools to make the best choice. Contact Highview Partners today to discover how we can connect you to people who perform.
Well, shifting gears and reflecting back now, what have been the most difficult professional challenges you've had to overcome in your time?
The probably one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do, and it's always hard to do, and still continues to be hard to do, and that is letting someone go. And it's a difficult decision to do. A lot of thought and time is put into it. It's sometimes not the best fit. Maybe the circumstance changes. but I always find it's like a heavy heart to do
Mm.
it, because you're impacting a person's reputation, their financial livelihood, their self-confidence, and you want to make sure it's a wise decision, not just for the company, but also for them too. And so that's the probably the most challenging thing that I've had to do.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand. On the flip side, what's been your proudest professional accomplishment so far, if you could name one?
Yeah. Well, I would say that the number one thing that I get such an excitement over, and that is to see a team member and see their raw talent and it turn into something amazing. And it's really one of my most proudest moments when I see individuals where they've accomplished something where it's beyond what they could imagine or other people could imagine, or finding where they have great passion. And that's exactly what, I was very fortunate at Concert, because they moved me into different areas as the needs happened in the organization, but I could find kind of where my calling is and where I was very passionate about. And so helping a team member find their passion
Mm.
is like a really exciting part of the business of managing people.
It's interesting. I teed you up with that question, and you could have easily picked an example of how you've personally been successful in closing a major acquisition or leading a big shiny project, but you chose instead to focus on watching your team succeed, which I think speaks volumes. Andrew, what for you are the most enjoyable parts of your job?
I mean, similar lines, like I love mentoring, right? Like if I wasn't in real estate, I probably would be an executive coach, or the only other job I could think of that I probably would really enjoy is I'd probably be a bus tour guide, telling people about different real estate projects, their history was to come. When people come from out of town, I love to just show them different parts of the city, but I don't tell them about the different landmarks. I more tell them about the real estate projects that are happening, and
Mm.
I enjoy that a lot.
Well, I guess on that note, if you were driving that bus, or maybe standing at the back of the bus with a microphone in
Yeah.
Vancouver, what would be the first project you'd take them to?
Well, we bring them to a concert project, of course,
Yeah.
and there are many of them.
Well, what about Toronto? Let's nail
Oh,
down. Give us an example.
well, you know what? There are some neat projects that we've done at Concert. So, for example, we have a project. There's two projects that are on either side of a place called Berksea Park, and the Berks. We have a project called the Berksea, and also 88 Scott on either side. But in the middle of this Berksea Park, there's a building called the Flatiron Building, and that is actually the most photographed building in all of Toronto. And when we looked at that in a concert, we thought, wow, what a fantastic building and landmark. And there were opportunities to purchase those properties around there, and so that we did that.
Mm,
And so, of course, I can't. I'm happy to talk about the landmark, but also happy
yeah.
to talk about the real estate around it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay. Well, what about the most challenging aspects of your job? What do you think they are?
Well, I would say the one of the challenges right now is how our tenants are dealing with COVID-19, right? Like, so for example, we're fortunate that our commercial fund is, 64% is industrial. We have very little retail. It's only at the base of our office buildings or our business parks. We're geographically, diversified by asset class as well. And so we have very little retail, but the retail that we do have, these people are struggling. They've put their life savings in their businesses, and a lot of them are struggling, and they're looking for customers, and some of them are close to bankruptcy, and so we as Concert are trying our best to help the hardest hit tenants in our portfolio, see what we can do to help them along. But it's very challenging right now for many of them, and it's very heartbreaking.
Yes, for those retail businesses that rely on trade from office workers, it must be extremely stressful. And I think the uncertainty of not knowing when people will return makes it almost impossible to plan for, too.
Yes, that's right.
Well, what do you have left to accomplish in your career, Andrew? Are there any specific projects or initiatives that you're most excited about?
Well, I would say, my wife, who's a she's an accomplished family doctor. Both of her and I, we feel that there's more to do when it comes to homelessness, addiction, mental health, and poverty, not just in the downtown east side, but in other parts of Metro Vancouver and also in Toronto. And we are also spending time with different organizations right now to see how we can help them. And so, for example, myself, there are many organizations that are looking for new facilities, a new location to house some of these very, challenging circumstances. And so I'm trying to see how I can help them, given my network and some of my skills, to see if we can actually help them along. And not just, again, as I said, in downtown east side, but also in other parts of Metro Vancouver. And then my wife also, she is with those same organizations, looking to see how can she use her medical background to help vulnerable women and children as well. And that particularly is in the downtown east side. So we feel like there is an opportunity for us to do something. There's certainly a need. And these are the most vulnerable people in our society today. So we as a family feel like we've got to rally around these organizations to support them.
Yeah, well, that's very, very commendable. I didn't know about that. So thanks for sharing. Andrew, what advice do you have for anyone starting out in the industry?
Well, when I started, I met Dave Podmore and 26 years ago. And, I remember the interview quite well. He said, "So what do you want to do?" And I actually answered, "It doesn't matter." And I think he thought I was crazy. And the reason why I answered it that way is because I had done so much homework on the organization that it didn't really matter what I did, so long as I just got my foot in the door and just learned the organization. They learn and they know me and they get to know me. And of course I didn't know anything about real estate really, and so I don't know enough to be smart enough to figure out what role should I really have. But joining an organization was really important. And then he asked me, "So what do you want to be paid?" And I said, "It doesn't matter." And again, he probably thought I was crazy. But I didn't have any debt. I paid off my student loans. I was living at home. I didn't have any dependents. So I was fortunate financially that I didn't have to, make a lot of money. And the way I looked at it was that Concert would pay me what I was worth because their value system, because they're full of integrity. So they wouldn't take advantage of me that way. And so I think what I find now with some young people that come across my desk is that they're very, very focused on the specific title, and they're very, very focused on the dollar, and they're not as focused on the organization or the people running it. I would think the better way to do it is to focus on the organization, look at their values, look at the people that run it, and see if they align with yours. And if they do, then you should grab it. It doesn't matter what you do. Eventually, you'll find your way, but join the organization that really appeals to you.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. So getting to know you a little bit more now, Andrew, what are your passions outside of work that perhaps people in the industry may not know about you? And you've kind of shared one of those, so I'm not sure if you've got any others.
Yeah, so we, my wife and I have three little passions. We have a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. We got two boys and a girl, and we're fortunate that they're all wonderful. They're all different, and they're very passionate about lots and lots of different things. Like my oldest, for one of his projects, it was an entrepreneur course, and so he decided to build a course making non-medical masks. He didn't know how to sew. He didn't know anything, but he thought, okay, well, maybe I can make this and make some money. And so him and I have been spending some time on revenue minus expenses equals return, and then return on costs. And then we're working on cash flow. And he wants to make this a business. And these skills are really awesome for him to learn. And so that's really, really exciting that way. I think he sees the dollars behind it. He's certainly got the business sense. My second son, he loves to read, and so he's 11, and he wanted to know a little bit about respirology. So he decided to open up one of my wife's old medical books and started to read the respirology chapter. And I didn't really understand what he was saying. And then my youngest, she's like the boss of the family. She's 7 years old, and but she's at the same time the loving princess in our family. So we are very fortunate that we've got great kids, but they are keeping us busy.
The future is in good hands with the Tong household, sort of looking after us all. So
that's only because of my very smart wife. So,
yeah. Let's wrap things up, and I'll ask you 5 quick fire questions here.
Sure.
So, question number 1: what's your favorite major city outside of Canada?
Beijing.
One thing under $100 that you have bought recently that's had the biggest impact on your life?
Bought a tomato plant, some herbs, some flowers, and a cucumber plant, which shockingly is growing.
What was the last book that you recommended to somebody?
Trusted Advisor by Robert Galford.
Okay. Favorite Vancouver restaurant?
Best Chinese restaurant in the city of Vancouver is Kirin Mandarin Chinese restaurant on Alberni in downtown Vancouver.
If you could listen to only one album for the rest of your life, what would it be?
So this might surprise some people, but it would be Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor, performed by Lang Lang in 2005.
Oh, that's my pick as well.
Good call.
Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to get to know you and to hear your advice. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.